Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vellum Podcast, in which we cover the latest developments across the political, policy, and regulatory landscape. Today, we'll be covering a topic that has sent shockwaves across the globe. Within a day of being inaugurated, President Donald Trump has issued directives with profound implications for the rest of the world. With me here today, I have two renowned foreign relations experts, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves.
Thank you very much. My name is Macharia Munene. I teach at USIU.
My name is Mikhail Nyamweya, and I've just completed the Master of Science in African Studies from the University of Oxford. My focus is on African politics.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Jewel Tete. I am a public policy practitioner as well as an international relations enthusiast, and I'll be your host for today. So, right off the bat, I'd like to hear from you. What were your initial reactions when news of the executive orders broke?
Well, not surprising, because Donald Trump had said he would do that during the campaign. And he has a focus that he wants to overturn almost everything. And to prove that he was not guessing or playing, he did it on the first day. A list of very many things that he wanted overturned, some of them unconstitutional. But he did it and let other people worry about it. So people are now talking about it. He seems to have the intention of rearranging the earth or the world. So he's an imperialist on one side, and he also wants to avoid foreign entanglement on the other side. He has said he wants to grab Canada, turn it into a state. He wants to retake Panama, the way Teddy Roosevelt had done, to build a canal. So he sees himself as a modern-day Roosevelt to that extent.
What I can say is his move was well expected, particularly due to his campaign rhetoric, which was "Make America Great Again," or in other words, America First. And to say that the moves were very expected is also to make some bit of parallels with his first term. He was able to do a few things that he had promised upon his campaign pledge. And in his campaigns as well, he was trying to appeal to the American masses. And I believe that as soon as he joined office, he wanted to fulfill whatever he had promised many of his voters. And I think to that particular extent, whatever is happening right now, particularly as a result of his executive orders, are things that were very much expected. And as Professor said, there is more to come.
So what do you think the immediate and long-term impacts of these cuts on foreign aid and foreign funding will be on Kenya?
Well, it's a wake-up call. And Kenyans and the other countries that rely on aid are being told to wake up and stop being stupid. Aid is not aid, it's a leverage. And you make people conditioned to aid. It's like drug addiction. So aid addiction, the same way. So this may be part of the therapy. Because if you look at Kenya and a few other countries, they really concentrate on production. We consume more than we produce. And because we do not produce, we end up depending on somebody's largesse. And then what do they get in return? Because it's not free. So if Trump has weighed the figures and said we are not getting as much as we thought we should, then he cuts. And when he cuts, Kenyans should wake up. I mean, they can take care of themselves. A few, maybe 1 or 2 decades back, when Kenya had a president called Kibaki, and he went out of his way to ensure that you are self-sufficient, to the point at one time he was boasting we can do without donors. And the donors were not amused. So that meant that the leverage they have on the country is reduced when you are independent. And we saw what happened. And they reduced him into submission. Aid addiction is a disease. And the aid peddler will not be amused by reducing that opportunity to peddle. First of all, Trump is an anomaly to America. He's not the sort of person that the drafters of the Constitution intended to be president. And since he knows that, so he's upsetting things there. The thinking that was there about organs like you said and others, they have a purpose to promote American agenda, whatever that is. But if Trump doesn't agree with that particular agenda, that's why he's overturning things. But it's a good opportunity for countries to wake up and be serious about their own country.
So, Professor, allow me to ask you, you agree with former President Uhuru Kenyatta's sentiments that this is a wake-up call and America is under no obligation to provide funding to us?
Absolutely. The man is right.
Having that in mind, how prepared would you say the Kenyan government is, and even the African countries at large, how prepared are we to deal with the ramifications of these executive orders?
Some look better prepared than others. Kenya is not prepared. Look at what has happened in Sahel. And this Burkina Faso fellow, Traore, managed to clear all those foreign debts and they are making their economy thriving. And what did he do? He kicked out the French and the Americans. And then reorganized and increased production, making people really self-reliant. And we understand that today the economy is thriving. So there are a few countries where they've got their act together. Others maybe will also follow the way and get their act together. But unfortunately, many of the countries are not prepared for this because they have become aid addicts. And so you have governance or government that start budgeting with dreams, not with the resources. So you say, I want this and this and this and this, and where will it come from? See, the donors are there. Instead of saying, here is the pie, then you budget based on what you have. Unfortunately, many of our countries do not do it that way. They start the other way around, and then they go begging for what they should not be doing. So some countries would do well. Others will struggle a little bit.
But concerning Burkina Faso, and to the point where they have even, quote-unquote, chased away the French, how sustainable would that approach be, given the fact that we don't operate in a vacuum as Kenya, as Burkina Faso? We operate in an international arena where we have to have these relations with other people. And of course, when you're chasing away the French, who one could say they're benefiting from being in Burkina Faso, how well is that going to be received by the rest of the world, the global north, the superpowers? Is that a sustainable strategy for the rest of African countries to adopt?
Yes, it is sustainable if it's run by the right people who know what they are doing. Part of the problem is that we have people in positions of responsibility who are ignorant. And when they are there, they really don't know what they are doing. So they are maneuvered. Talk to some of our policymakers, and they will admit. They will admit they really don't know what the national interests are. In dealing with these powers, whether it's the Chinese, the Americans, or the Russians, the key is to be knowledgeable, to know about them and about yourself, and where you have interests coinciding, you agree to deal. Where there is a divergence and they are going to hurt you, tell them no. You give them reasons. And they respect that. They don't like to be made to look foolish, even if they are powerful. Now, small countries like Kenya, we do not have big guns. That's true. And there are some things we don't have. But I think we have enough intelligence to tell them when they are messing up. And that is a strength in itself. In the case of Burkina Faso, I don't think it was extraordinary. They just used common sense. And in many of these things, it's common sense that's the issue. Informed by good intelligence, information, careful thinking, informed by some historical perspective to know them. So if you have the wrong people making policy who are ignorant, the fundamentals will not be right. And that's what the problem is. So if we get policymakers right, and if they actually are allowed to play their part, then there's no problem in turning the economy around the country without burdening people. It can be done. And I think that's what the Traorean people did, using common sense. So it can be done. I have no problem with that one. It's a wake-up call, and people should be serious about it. I think we need to be clear that our policymakers know what they are doing, and they can defend the position anywhere in the world.
I look at it as more of a very uncertain state because largely the freeze is not known how long it's going to last, and so this breeds a lot of fears and anxieties, especially in communities that have been the actual recipients of the aid that has been coming from the US. In the short term, what I foresee is a health crisis because there's a substantial population that are vulnerable to TB, vulnerable to HIV and malaria, which in essence are actually the most funded agencies of coming from the West rather. So what I see is a health crisis. What I'm also foreseeing is issues to do with food security. You've seen how we've been having very adverse climatic conditions. Last year indeed showed us that flooding can actually be a very huge concern. And at times, especially towards the end of the year, into the new year, we've started to see long periods of when there's a lot of drought. And that's also the time where in many places it's either you're harvesting or it's where you're planting. So what I'm foreseeing in that particular aspect is, in the short term, is a crisis. The long term, what I'm foreseeing is this might force, Kenya and other African countries alike to, enter into diversifying their partnerships while also looking inwards. That's what I'm foreseeing, yeah.
How well equipped do you think Kenya is to deal with these perceived short-term and long-term challenges that we are bound to face?
At the moment, which is also a very huge concern, you realize that a lot of investment has gone towards the sectors that I've just highlighted. For instance, in the health sector, HIV/AIDS treatment has been quite effective, especially through what we call PEPFAR, which used to be called the U.S. President's Emergency Relief for HIV/AIDS, something of the sort. On the other hand, we've also had funding that has been going to agricultural programs such as it's called Feed the Future, and which Feed for Future has really tried to assist many farmers to try and mechanize their farms. So far what I believe is, in terms of how well equipped we are, there's some semblance of it, but now it would need now more intentional approaches towards now fast tracking how equipped we are. We are quite equipped, but not very equipped.
Okay. Professor, what would you say about the state of our preparedness, given that even internally on our own as Kenya, our healthcare system is facing a bit of controversy at the moment. And, with the US withdrawing funding from the WHO, of course, the withdrawal is immediate, but funding commitments last for up to 1 year, I believe. How well prepared do you say we are?
Well, not as well as we should be. And the example is in the attempted overhaul of the health system with a new thing called SHA and SHE. Even people who are promoting it with a lot of vigor have had to complain, like Kimani Ichung'wah. So when he was started, he said, no, this thing is not good. But he's the same fellow who was saying that. So we are not prepared. In our own mechanism, it's not very well. And then the reliance part about the cutting of aid to WHO, which is not a surprise, given that Trump had complained about WHO before he ever became president. So that's not a surprise at all. Because the perception is that WHO caters mainly for the Global South. And he has a problem with the Global South generally. And then it was headed by an Ethiopian, maybe if it was a European or an American heading it, but now an Ethiopian. So something is wrong. Then they accuse it of corruption and all those sort of things. But it did help to reach individuals and some community. That's true. But that does not obviate the need for the country to be able to take care of its own people with good policies.
Yeah, for sure.
Which can then be reinforced by good discussions with external players. It's true, no country can live on its own. It has to deal with others. But the terms of dealings are the issue. So we are poorly prepared, but it's not because of lack of resources, material resources. It's because of lack of policy resources. There's such a thing. The right thinking at the top.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you were to advise the government, what would you say so that even as we progress through this 90-day review period and even through this one-year review period for the WHO, what would you say to the government, to policymakers? What can they do different? I know there was already mention of maybe exploring how we can partner with other jurisdictions, but what would you say about that?
You need to go back to the drawing board. It's okay to partner with others who may be sympathetic for, that's okay. But there is need for serious rethink. President Ruto, because it flies with him, can talk to all the other people, they still a waste of time, unless he's involved. But they do need a serious and candid self-examination of themselves, of the country, of everybody, and not just have some sycophants going there to cheer, and then say we had a consultation, which is nonsense. Like this university funding thing, it was nonsense from the beginning. And we know what happened. People were given a brief, go and do that, and they came back with it, and they said it's good. So you need to go beyond that. The critics, as well as the supporters, and free thinkers. This is the time we need free thinking, a lot of it. So yes, the country is in a crisis, and maybe deeper than it was before because of this development. So how does it get out of this thing and stop chest thumping? There's a lot of chest thumping around. We need to change that mind frame and put back value to the fundamentals, the education system, the health system, the right thinking. But we do need a national dialogue, and not of a few people who are selected because they are connected to so-and-so. And then you say that's national. Needs to be serious.
Okay.
And I think we shall go somewhere. All is not lost.
If you had the ear of the government, what would you say to them to ensure that you're not caught flat-footed by the time these review periods expire?
What I believe is, in common parlance, of course, the areas that are most affected should also be the ones that should be given more, what I could call more focus. For instance, the health sector, agricultural sector, to a further extent, education. I believe those three sectors need to be the ones that should actually be, given more emphasis on, and this could largely be, of course, with stakeholders being involved, could be something that could actually mitigate the issue in the long term, because we are not very certain on for how long this is going to last. What I also believe is the government, of course, has the capacity through, of course, domestic mobilization of resources. It could be able to sustain some of those things for the time being. But also this could be improved with increased, partnerships with the private sector. It could also need Kenya using its position right now to try and foster particularly in the region, with partner states of the East African community, to try and see how they could all join forces and try to look at how they could best mitigate the situation. Because what I believe is the ideal logic behind most of these regional organizations, in any case, is to become one, whether it should be financial-wise, whether it's as a political federation. So the assumption should be that in as much as they are member states, or they are rather trying to achieve their own particular interests as of that particular time, they should also bear in mind that in the long term, if they dream for them to become a union anyway, in whichever sense it is, they should also try and join forces in this particular aspect and try to see how best they could move forward. I also believe some sectors, such as the civil society, could best try to formulate policy discussions around this particular issue that could result in a long-term solution. They could also try to, make the government accountable. In essence, that's their job anyway. For non-governmental organizations, I believe they should try and diversify their partnerships, because all of these sectors work hand in hand. The government agencies, the non-governmental organizations, the civil society. If all of them also work hand in hand, then I believe there could be a way forward on this aspect.
Okay. I'd like for us to double down on the partnerships, especially on a state-to-state level.
Yeah.
I think we all know President Trump is very big on bilateral agreements as opposed to multilateral engagements. So is there a future, is there a possibility where we can start thinking about a direct engagement with the US in terms of healthcare and funding? Would this be a feasible approach? Is this even a path worth considering?
Well, I don't believe it would be feasible at the moment because we've seen how the implications that have been made at the moment, whatever has happened in the moment, has had immediate implications. So I believe in as much as there should be that kind of agreement, I also believe that even within the region, there should also be such deliberations, because why would you go to seek something from someone who's very far, whereas you can actually collaborate with someone who is near, and you are bound by something that is very, very similar, very common. I believe it could be feasible, it's possible, but given the circumstances at hand, it would be wise to, try and look at what you have advantage in vis-a-vis what your neighbor has disadvantage in, and try to, foster a way forward on it.
Okay. What would that look like? Because one could argue that, say, in Kenya, we're looking at the EAC and other regional agreements. Would they be able to deliver to the extent to which the United States has been able to deliver?
First of all, I believe that many of these organizations, particularly within the region, aren't that well financially capable to make a long-term solution in terms of how, for instance, the US has really tried to assist in whichever capacity it has. So I don't also look at it as something that immediately it would make a lasting impact as compared to what we've had in the past.
Okay.
Yeah.
Professor, I'll go over to you. Should government and policymakers be thinking of approaching it from a direct agreement between Kenya and the United States with regard to healthcare and funding?
Yeah, it's possible, but it depends on how you go about it. You see, Uhuru Kenyatta and Donald Trump seem to agree. When Trump was first president and Uhuru was president at the same time, they seem to get along fairly well, although occasionally Trump would do something that will make people wonder, like firing a Minister of Foreign Affairs when he's in Nairobi instead of waiting for the guy to go back home. At one time or the other, that Uhuru and Trump were in the same place and discussing issues there. And Trump saying very nice things about Uhuru, and Uhuru saying very nice things about Trump. And I think they were in the Oval Office, so they know each other. And Uhuru was there joking about how he used to work with Pompeo in his other capacity. So apparently it can be done, but it depends on how it is approached. First, it is in the interest of the United States and in the interest of Trump himself and his team to have good dealings with Kenya, in as much as it is in our interest. So if it is approached from that angle, what are they to benefit by dealing with us? Of which then giving us some tablets is a small thing, because they are getting more. So whom are we sending there to discuss bilateral things with the Trump people? If you send their jokers, you are going nowhere. But there are some people in Kenya who command respect, even today. It can be done, but not by announcing on rooftops that we are going to do this. It's an issue of diplomacy and tact and common sense. So if you can show Trump that it is in his interest or the U.S. interest to have dealings with Kenya at certain levels, and of which the giving us a little pocket money is not a big issue for America. It's a big issue for us, but not for them. I think it can be done. You think you attached the regional body like EAC. It would be very good if it could work.
Professor, I'd like us to go back to a point you had stated in the beginning of US taking one side of the world and other players like Russia taking the other side. With US withdrawing from the WHO and freezing foreign funding on foreign aid, what is this bound to do to the balance of power? Are we likely to see other players come into the landscape? We have talks of maybe China coming in to fill that gap. Are we likely to see a future where this is actualized? And how best can the Kenyan government and African governments position themselves in such a scenario?
The Chinese are already here. And in fact, the Americans have been reacting to the Chinese. The Chinese have come even with the Americans here and the British here and all those things because they are very tactful in the way they do things. The choice is on the African side, not what those people do, because they're going to do anyway. What they think is in their interest, they'll do it. The obligation is on us to be sure of what it is that we want and how to advance it and protect it. So whether we are dealing with the Chinese or the Russians or the Americans or the British and the French, is first of all, do we have the requisite preparation in terms of knowledge? Ordinarily, there are three types of knowledge which are critical in discussions, bilateral, multilateral, other laterals. Three types of knowledge, which sometimes we lack. The first type of knowledge is that of self-awareness. Sometimes you go someplace and the other side knows you more than you know yourself, which is a tragedy in itself. So the first type of knowledge is to know yourself so well that nobody else can come and claim that they know you more than you know yourself. That's your weaknesses and your strength, and what can give you leverage over the others. That's one. The second type of knowledge is to know the other side. If it's the Chinese, the Americans, the Russians, or our neighbors, the Ugandans, what do we know about these people and their policies and thinking? In the case of America, what do we know about Trump and his people? And therefore, to figure out how to approach them, or the British or the French, or Putin. What do we know about Putin? Now, if you know nothing about the other side and they know more about you, you're in trouble. So that's the second type of knowledge which we can develop. There's no question about that. We can do that. The third one is to have that knowledge, common sense knowledge, of knowing when their interests and our interests coincide. Well, there are times when the interests will diverge. If their interests and our interests meet in a positive way, we say, okay, hallelujah, let's sign up, agree, we are going to do it this way. But if they clearly diverge, you should be able to say no. Not just saying no because it's fun to say no, but you say no with good reasons, pointing out why. And they'll respect that. So if you have that position, that knowledge, you are likely to make a lot of contacts. And it does not matter what the Chinese or the Americans or the Russians think, but they'll respect you. First of all, you know your position, you know theirs, and therefore you know what you are talking about. And you find that you are going to deal more from that level than if it's a one-sided thing, which when it's one-sided, then it becomes a dictatorship. They just tell you do this. And if you don't, you are going to withdraw the carrots or the sweets. So it can be done. But we need to develop a very high level of the three types of knowledge before dealing with others.
Like Professor said, China has been there for quite a while. And the common assumption is that China has been new to, the global system, for the last, 7 years, 8 years or so, but it's been here for a very long time. And so I wouldn't look at it as very much of an imbalance of balance of power, because at the end of the day, all these actors we talk about, Russia, the United Kingdom, France, they've been there for the longest time. So I don't foresee it as, an equal distribution of power in the long term. What I normally say is the more things change, the more they're likely to remain the same. And so I think what I look at it as, the status quo is not going to change as much. That's what I foresee. But what also I had forgotten to mention earlier is that for for states that have been particularly allied to the US, I wouldn't suggest that they should, entirely rub off the relations that they've been having, because as Professor said, for instance, Uhuru Kenyatta seems to have had a very cordial relationship with Trump during Trump's first term. But also one thing that comes into play, especially in diplomacy, is what we call charisma. And charisma is very essential in diplomacy, and charisma accompanied with pragmatism is also very important. So while also many African countries are trying to, seek new partnerships with powers in the East, they should also be very wise enough to also balance with the US in that particular case. Because in that particular aspect, that balance of power is not likely to be very unequal in the long term. So I don't see like there is going to be any imbalance, because the more things change, the more they're likely to remain the same.
We've covered policy, we've covered academia, but now when it comes down to the practicality of things, the masses on the ground are angry. We just had protests. The government is supposed to be providing these services when it comes to education, healthcare, but they've outsourced this. They get funding from these US-funded organizations. We get help from them. And now that this funding has been stopped, there's bound to be a gap there. We've addressed this. We've said that the government is not well equipped to deal with these changes as of now. Well, there's still steps to be made, there's still progress. Are we on shaky ground? What does this mean for us moving forward?
At the moment, we are indeed on shaky grounds. Like we've just earlier discussed the issue to do with the recent protests. Mainly the protests were fueled by punitive tax policies. I think deep down they were also fueled by, people believing that there is very serious misappropriation of funds. Misappropriation of funds in the sense that aside from embezzling them, they are used for the wrong reasons. So if you stand on national media and say, like Professor said, that I wear a belt worth this much or I wear a watch worth this much, and you had a ministry where someone is seeking, for instance, an internship position or a position within that particular ministry, and this person very, very much believes that they are well qualified for the job, then now that will begin to spur that kind of aggression that people will have, which would result to that particular protest. And so what I believe is, number one, the funds need to be allocated to the essential areas, which are three, which in essence, are the basic needs of people. Education, at this point it is a necessity. Food, health. That's number one. Number two, I also believe, because if you look at the current technocrats that we have, they're not technocrats by training. Many of them are politicians, and many of them were appointed to those positions through the loyalty that they had. What I believe is people who need to man those positions should actually bear the technical expertise in how to run them. Because if you're heading a ministry of, let's say, for instance, foreign affairs, and maybe perhaps you haven't gone beyond secondary education, it could be quite very tasking for you, and you might not necessarily be knowing where that money should go to. And so I believe appointing people who have the technical expertise to those positions and channeling the funds where they're supposed to go to, I think that particular aspect, then there'd be a way forward on it. Because if 214 billion can be spent on something like the office, for instance, of the Prime Cabinet Secretary and so on and so forth, which is not it's not a position that has any constitutional provisions. I sincerely believe if that kind of money can be channeled elsewhere and many others, then I think that for the time being, some essential issues could be addressed quite effectively.
So you've spoken about sending technocrats out there, and Professor had also mentioned that if we're sending someone, for example, if we are to have a direct relation with the US, we need to send someone who wields respect and influence, and someone who the US can listen to, and these powers that be can listen to. I'd like to ask, and I'd like to know, who is the current ambassador to the US from Kenya?
Whoever was sent did not resonate. Such a serious office that when you send somebody there, to be somebody who already commands respect. Whether he is a political appointee or a technical person, should be somebody who commands respect. There is doubt whether that happened. I've had some people in the US, Kenyans in the US, they complained about it, about the person who was sent there. Does this person really know what he's doing? They tried to address their diaspora and blundered or goofed, saying some things that did not make sense. So they wondered, what is he doing here? Maybe he was appointed because he's a crony of somebody, or he donated good things to the campaign. And I think there was not much care taken in appointing some people. I know the ambassador to the United Nations, the young man, has worked for the UN before in his earlier life. So he has some idea about the UN. But the picture that has been portrayed is that some of the people appointed may not command that respect in the operations of their job. And I would add that although we need technical people with technical knowledge, we need more people with common sense first, because you can get technicians to help. You can say some of the most successful operators are people who simply use common sense. And then it made sense because people could relate to something like that. In terms of foreign policy, many people will accept that probably the best Minister of Foreign Affairs Kenya has ever had was Nyamweya. And all he was doing is just using common sense. He was a medical doctor. But the man had a lot of sense. You talk to him, to just using what? Common sense. And then he knows where to go and what to get things done, which he did. And that's why he has a reputation of having been the best. There have been other good ones, but they don't seem to measure up to that. So I would emphasize that each appointee should be somebody with common sense. But that somebody with common sense should be able to know his weakness, and then where to get the supporting whatever it is. Because you cannot be everything. But main thing, do you know where to get what you need? And the three types of knowledge that we talked about earlier. And there was time when you hear somebody was appointed, yes, that makes sense. You may not be a technician in the area, but it makes what? Sense. And they went out of their way to distinguish themselves. And such a person should not be a sycophant. Because if he's a sycophant, and whether he's technical or whatever, he'll not be able to tell the boss he's wrong. When policies are wrong, someone should be able to say, this is wrong. He may not get his way, but at least you have his say. We may have a problem with people who are there just to do strange things. And yes, we have ambassadors who have grown up in the ministry. They're there. Very good ones. But we also have others who are not that good. Although they grown up with what? We have had the political appointees who are brilliant as ambassadors and exceptional. Of course, we've also had others that were disasters. So it's up to the president and his team to assess who they are appointing where and for what purpose. And the ambassador is a representative of the president first and foremost. So somebody who knows all those parameters has common sense and can deal with issues as they come in a common sense way. It's what we need. And in a place like Washington, you need somebody who can easily mingle in high circles. As a matter of natural, not somebody who has to struggle to say hi to somebody. I'm not saying that the ambassador, that's what he is, because I don't know. But we've known people who are very easy. They make friends very quickly.
When we got independence in 1963, Kenya immediately, established quite some good relations with the West, where the West implying the United States. And it has gone and so on and so forth in subsequent administrations as well, under Daniel Arap Moi, under Anna Kibaki, under Kenyatta. Up until now, we've had very good relations with the West. Kenya acts as an anchor state within the region and potentially also within the continent. And at the end of the day, the US will still need, Kenya to advance some of its interests within the region and within the continent. The relations are likely to be sustained on that particular regard. As much as America would want to look very much inwardly, there was some semblance of cooperation that it may need, especially from Kenya, more than other countries. Alluding to what Professor said, this will be really dependent very much on who is sent there. Initially, there was an outcry by the Kenyan diaspora in the US, and they were talking about how, because of the, executive decisions that have been made, particularly in terms of immigration, many of them had an outcry. And so the first person to reach out to is the Kenyan mission that is there. And many of them were trying to wonder, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, because when they're raising their concerns, he simply says he doesn't know what to do. So you see, in that particular regard, it becomes very difficult who you're sending there, because if indeed there's an issue that the Kenyan embassy there could really assist with, then the issue wouldn't be as bad and it wouldn't portray Kenya as a bad picture. So yeah, the diplomat is a representative of the president when he's outside. I really believe the relations are likely to be sustained in that particular regard because they've been there for more than 60 years. But I think the person who's there at the moment is the one who's likely to determine how things will be in the long term.
Thank you so much, Mikhail. Thank you so much, Prof. I have been in conversation with Mikhail Nyamweya and Prof.Macharia Munene, both of who are experts in foreign relations, and we've covered a range of topics, starting from the return of President Trump, the executive orders he signed, and what these mean for me, for you, for Kenya, and for Africa. We've also tackled what the African governments need to do in order to fill this funding gap that's going to be left. I hope this session has been as enlightening to you as it has been for me. I've been your host, Jewel Tete, and this is the Vellum Podcast. For this and more, make sure to check out our Vellum website as well as our social media platforms. See you soon, but until then, keep it Vellum.